All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Whether you're at the drive-in, please hold your horn applause. But whether you're at the drive-in or at home watching this, I want to thank you for watching No Ordinary Man, as well as give a little round of applause to our special guest. We have Amos Mack. If you want to wave your hand, Amos. He's the one of the co-writers of the film, as well as Chase Joynt, one of the co-directors of the film. And so this is a little different. Typically, we do have Q&As with the Film Fest, but this time around, we're going to have a little conversation about this film, and I hope we get to learn a little bit extra about the movie everyone just saw. I guess I'll just start it off, and we'll see where it goes. The first thing that I thought about with you guys is what is your Billy Tipton story? Because everyone had kind of their moment, and what brought you to the story? Because you guys are officially the reason why I know about him.
I love that. That's great. We can be people's origin stories.
Yeah, for sure. I think you might be for a lot of people.
Amos, do you want to start off?
Oh, sure. I mean, the first time, I can't really pinpoint the first time I heard about Billy Tipton. I remember, he was on various online listicles. He was his photograph was shared on social media with stories about trans history for 10 plus years in my lifetime, in my experience. He's always existed in the trans ether. He's always been around. He's a name that's been discussed, who's been brought into stories of look at trans people have always been here, look at the story of this one man. So I can't pinpoint. I wish that I could. It would be a really amazing thing if I could, but I just feel like he's always been there. It's like a family history almost. Like he's an old relative, that you hear about but never met.
I love that answer. Yeah, I feel similarly. Definitely small sparks and photos would cross feeds and in conversation, but it was really only through this project that I think we collectively started to understand the complexity of Tipton's story beyond what was already available in culture via the talk show and tabloid media, or even Diane Middlebrook's book.
Yeah. Now, with Billy, moving just aside from Billy's story, were there other kind of forefathers, grandfathers of the transmasculine community that you guys were thinking about doing a film about? Or is Billy kind of the original?
I mean, personally, I was never looking to, no one else was on my mind to create a film. I had never thought of writing a film before I was approached for this project specifically. And when I did speak to Aisling for the very first time, who's the other co-writer and co-director of the film, when she brought this idea, I thought that it was incredible because I have such an interest and love for trans history and for learning more myself. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity for me to, it's such a privilege to have a job that you love, and this is one of the experiences.
And I was just going to say, I think, transmasculine history is an underattended genre, if we want to make it into a genre. And so there are people like Lou Sullivan or Reed Erickson or Little Axe Broadnax, really compelling transmasculine characters that don't have moving image projects and exist again alongside Tipton on some of these lists and are taken up in culture through books in other ways. But there really is a lack of documentary attention.
Yeah. And with the form of the documentary for this film, there's a lot of different components, a lot of different layers. Was it always kind of this hybrid, some would say experimental, but I feel like experimental often means cold and distant, but it's extremely, extremely touching, and it hits you very hard. Did you always have these different components with the casting, with the testimonials, with kind of limited archival footage of sorts?
I mean, the casting was always part of the conversation from the beginning, with Aisling bringing that up pretty early on, and as a way to not have a traditional reenactment. I don't think that Chase can probably speak more as to why that wasn't part of the film, but the casting was important to allow transmasculine voices to embody Tipton, whether they knew about him or not, to allow them to have a chance to connect with this character. And there was really a lack of archival, there's no video of him, there's no film of moving image of Billy Tipton. So that's why the casting felt so important.
And there's so many ways that you could think of the lack of moving image as a limitation, but we really took it as an opportunity as a team to think otherwise. And I think very quickly in the research and development phase of the project, it was clear that to tell a story about Billy Tipton is to tell a story about transmasculine representation in a very particular period of time. It's to tell a story about family. It's to tell a story about music and performance. And so trying to assemble a cohort of experts and speaking subjects who could animate Tipton's story from these various directions, I think set the kind of foundation for a more playful, embodied engagement through our transmasculine actors as they really sort of thought out loud about what it would mean to look back at a history in this way.
Now, did you have a larger casting call for the final group, or did you already have your casting call like actors in mind?
It's a little bit of a hybrid. We sent out a wide casting call in New York and LA for transmasculine performers to participate in a documentary about Billy Tipton. And the genre specifications were clear and underlined. So no one walking into that room thought that they were going to walk out with a lead role in a fiction film. And everyone came in sort of armed and prepped with the understanding that they would be talking out loud with their peers. You know, but there are all these incredible sparks and synergies that happen from that broad call. Marquise Vilson, who emerges in the film as a star in his own right, you know, is a hugely important person in early transmasculine doc making. He was in a project called The Aggressives, or someone like Alex Davis, who's currently on Grey's Anatomy and networked with Amos, as we learn in the film, in years past. So there was all these ways that through the open call, we came together in unexpected and exciting clusters.
Now, were you surprised? I mean, I agree. Marquise really emerges as quite a star. And he really can play anything. If he can play like a 13-year-old little white Southern kid, you know, or Midwest kid. Were you surprised that Marquise kind of answered the call? Or were you like, this is genius for what we're trying to do with this documentary?
No, I actually want to revise my Marquise emerges as a star, because Marquise was a star walking into that room. You know, and I think what I love so much about his approach to the project is he is genuinely invested in collaborating about producing history about transmasculine history. And Billy Tipton is one way to do that. And through thinking about Billy Tipton and the legacy and visibility of Billy Tipton, we get to think about the intersections of race and class and gender that produced Tipton as actually more visible in public than other subjects. So someone like Little Axe Broadnecks, who is a Black transmasculine gospel artist gigging at the same time, and think, well, why are we telling a story about Tipton? And, you know, we could spend a whole nother Zoom with you talking about the other projects that we kind of want to make that have spun off from this kind of experimental approach.
Now, do you think you've created your own little mini genre? I mean, of course, I like to save like the what's the future, but you kind of hinted at it. Is this kind of a starting template for exposing other histories of transmasculine artists and beyond?
I mean, there's always more work. There's always more stories to tell. Whether or not we stick to this genre, I mean, I'd love to collaborate with Chase again. It was like, it's such a pleasure, so much fun. Such an incredible, like, creative bond I think we had over the project from day one and from before. So I think, you know, I'm always open for more trans storytelling.
Yeah, and I think that there's something about the experimental form that invites many voices to the table, to the screen, and that feels like a really compelling way forward, regardless of what stories we choose, really thinking you know, in polyvocal ways.
Cool. And speaking of like stories you choose, often it's interesting to see like a writing credit for a documentary, but obviously that's always a very important part of shaping the narrative arc of a story, because you're shooting hundreds and hundreds of hours. But Amos, were you a big part in drafting the scenes that the actors like did the casting call for?
Yes, I was a big part in writing that. Ashling and I worked on those together. We would take a pass at one and then, like, you know, share and tweak it or not, you know. And beyond that, I also worked on, you know, the arc of how the story should go, what we should include, like how we would go about telling different parts of Billy's story beyond the casting, and how we're going to use the archival footage and, you know, the audio files, and how we're going to include Diane Middlebrook and her version of the story into all of that.
Now, how did you decide upon the couple scenes that we saw featured, whether it was the Duke Ellington scene, the Bubba scene? Well, how come those scenes were chosen?
Well, after like researching Billy's life, I wanted to pinpoint moments that felt important to Billy. Like, what are moments that shaped his narrative from his point of view? Like, what were moments that he probably looked back on as an old person and thought, you know, oh, remember that time Duke came to the club, you know, he had a photograph with him and friends, and when Duke visited the club, and that was like, I knew that was an important moment for Billy. Also the first time that he met with Buck getting his first, Buck Thomason, for his first like on-air radio promotion before a local gig. And from what we've read, Buck Thomason was transmasculine himself, themselves, I'll say. And a moment of meeting another transmasculine person, perhaps for the first time, I felt was important to include as well.
Yeah, and it was so touching to see their reactions within those scenes. And I forget the name of the one actor, but they had that pause, and they had to take a moment to really realize the significance of this moment. And it really felt like almost, I think, time traveling back to that time and just seeing what that experience was like. And it was quite amazing. You guys captured it very well. Were there attempts to reach out to other members of the family, of Billy Tipton's family? Because you have Billy Jr. in there, but who else?
So Billy adopted 3 sons, and for various reasons, you know, Billy Jr. is the most willing and excited to speak about his father's legacy, and, you know, in a lot of ways was the closest. And so it made sense to us to really stay close to Billy Jr. and to spend some extended time. You know, we spent multiple days with him in Spokane, and I think that Billy Jr.'s presence on the talk show circuit and involvement in the commissioning of Middlebrook's book, and really as the person who's the holder of the archive, we wanted to stay there, you know, and really tell a story from his perspective.
It was shocking to see the Oprah footage, and you can also say it's like a moment in time. It's the 90s, things have changed, but did you try to reach out to Oprah's people at all for this and just get kind of a reaction, like, what's going on here?
I mean, I think what's so interesting about Oprah is that Oprah does that. I didn't think we'd be talking about Oprah, but let's go. You know, I think like Oprah has a kind of public reckoning every few years, right? I think that something about Oprah's career, Oprah methodologically turns and says, well, here's where I was 5 years ago, and here's where we are now, or here's the questions that I asked, and here's where we are now. And, you know, I think the presence of trans people on talk shows in the contemporary moment has really dramatically changed the narrative. So we can think about, you know, Laverne Cox's quite incredible, you know, repositioning of problematic questions with Katie Couric that I think will exist in culture forever as a real moment of speaking back to the legacy of talk show curiosities. And so, you know, for us, it was kind of important to let Oprah live in the historical context and to say, oh, this is what was happening in the early 90s, and to recognize that the talk show, the legacy of the talk show, is quite a complex one for trans people, because on one hand, it created a kind of spectatorial violence, and on the other hand, it was a kind of portal of visibility where people were starting to see people who potentially were like themselves and thinking like, huh, all right, like maybe part of this is possible. And it was always kind of playing with that tension of recognizing the double work.
And then, like, going off of that, did you guys ever consider, or was there a part about where things are now? Because I feel like you often kind of say in the past, and you have people's personal testimonials, but as a larger whole, there's mention, I believe, I think Stefan mentions it, about the kind of the classic narrative of the being outed. Is that still happening today that you find? Did you find people, especially with families, that happened to?
Is your question like, are people still being outed in ways that are out of their control?
Post to me, honestly.
Yeah. You know,
yeah, we stay with their story. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You know, I think that one of the dramatic differences between the context of Tipton's life and death and now is that we have a cultural vocabulary that is understanding transness and non-binariness and gender nonconformity in more legible ways. And so people, you know, the sort of snap retort of Tipton was a woman living as a man in pursuit of a career in music. Like, I don't think that a cultural narrative would take that that shape, but of course there are trans and you know, there are trans identifying people who live stealth and who make choices for privacy that I think that they lose control over after death. But I think, you know, treating Tipton in his particular time frame is important because transness or gender nonconformity, you know, was not as legible and did not exist in culture. And I think that is showcased in the treatment of his story by the tabloids.
And then besides other elements, were there, Amos, did you have other parts of the arc? You said you constructed, you know, the entire documentary arc. Were there parts that were left out due to time? Because it is a really tight runtime. It flies by. Were there elements that you initially thought you were going to put in or you wish were in?
A good question. I am not drawing on anything. I feel like, I mean, after writing like the treatment and the arc and the scenes with Aisling, and then going into production, it was like full steam ahead. And I feel like it's perfect as is. Like, there really wasn't, you know, being able to talk with Billy Jr. was incredible. It was something that came, I think, it was like later on in the process where we were confirmed that we were going to see Billy Jr., which was a very exciting time. But it was like, a lot of this was written with the hope that a lot of things would happen for the film so that we could have conversations with certain people and that we could do certain things. But I don't think anything was left out.
I think too that there are other ways to tell the story. Like, you know, people always want to know, if you Wikipedia Billy Tipton, you understand that he was a serial monogamist who had a lot of lovers. And, you know, that's like a different way we could tell Tipton's story.
Right.
And I think actually could have had its own arc and its own shape, and thinking about the role and power of heteronormativity in the mid-century. Like, I think that that's actually a different project. But for us, we really tried to stay away from the stories and curiosities that were already told and already ignited, and try to ask a new set of questions.
Cool. And then going off of that, what would you want to ask Billy Chase? Because I forget, Amos, did you have a part? Because I know like that was a section of the film. But Chase, what about you? Because you're hiding behind the camera.
Was I hiding? Yeah, I think I was.
Or working as well.
You know, it's a great question. I think that to kind of be geeky and meta about it, I would say, do you want to come over and watch our movie?
That's great.
And I would bring him, I would bring him into conversation. I'd be very curious.
And did you want to add anything, Amos, to your story, or have you thought about? Because I mean, I'm sure you've seen the movie 100 times, and you kind of have that staircase effect where you're walking away, you're like, "That's what I should have said."
No, I mean, I think mine remains the same as what I said in the film. Okay. I believe it's in the film, where I would love to have a conversation about his friendship with Buck Thomason, just to know how that first interaction went, what they thought of each other, and yeah. Just love to hear about his friendships, and yeah, tell me all the dirt on Buck, because I'm interested in that fellow.
Yeah, did you present pretty much all the information on Buck that's available?
Yeah, we did some major digging, a lot of different angles of trying to find more information on Buck, but.
Okay. So, you know, one of the classic questions is, what's the future of this project? Because you guys had a recent premiere. And I'm sure things have been a little bit crazy since then. What's that experience like? And then what's the future of the film?
Yeah, we premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival a few weeks ago, and we're announcing today, that we're premiering at, we're announcing our run in the States, and we're so happy to be here as a part of that run. And then, we really are hoping to have this project hit as many eyeballs as possible. So we will do our best to open up access as widely as possible, and we have a great team working on where we'll be, but we're gonna have some fun on the festival circuit for a little while and show up in as many Zoom boxes as possible.
Cool. And then is there a future drama narrative of the story, Amos or Chase?
Probably not of this story for me.
Okay.
Yeah, Chase.
Yeah, I mean, I like that we, took one approach in the hybrid doc space, and I think it's exciting to imagine a world where there would be a narrative project about Tipton. Maybe that project's a little bit more about his life and love and romance.
Yeah, well, I still hope if you guys are fortunate enough to go ahead and do that project, that you keep the experimental edge to it and not just tell a straight bio, because I feel like that's what Tiptons do. But well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for being part of my first Zoom Q&A and the festival's first pre-recorded Q&A. It was such a pleasure to watch this film, and I really hope it touches as many people. Opens eyes, of course, but just really connects with people. And it's very exciting with the virtual, because the accessibility is going to be much bigger. But
thank
cool.
you.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for having us. This was awesome.
So nice to chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, you too.